I'm doing good too. Sitting here, thinking about getting unstuck. One that jumped out at me, of course, in your background was Jive because that was such a phenomenal run for a while. But you've been doing this for 3 decades, right?
Yep.
So building a book around it.
Yeah. Well, I was someone who saw the startup ecosystem from a lot of different angles, right? And so I actually started as a management consultant way back when, but then really wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I was like this company for 5 years. So we built out a very healthy $12 million profitable business, and then scrapped the old business and built a new one with some money from Sequoia, that tears and some more tears. And at that point, the board really wanted to take the company public, and I was pretty fried and had little kids. So I was chairman as we geared the company to go. And ultimately, the company died a slow death on the public markets for a lot of reasons we can get into.
Dave Hersh, welcome to the Look Back. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing good too. Sitting here, thinking about getting unstuck, and that's been the focus of your new book, which I was so delighted to receive and review. It's a fantastic book, and it's so funny, Dave. You're an executive who's run multiple companies. I think the one that jumped out at me, of course, in your background was Jive because that was such a phenomenal run for a while. But you've been doing this for 3 decades, right?
Yep.
So, so for me, I normally get books from friends and colleagues, and I kind of understand what the goal of it's going to be. But when I saw Reignition, it took me a second. How did you get with the title, and how did you come up with this as a theme you decided to devote a whole bunch of time and energy behind building a book around?
Yeah. Well, I was someone who saw the startup ecosystem from a lot of different angles, right? And so I actually started as a management consultant way back when, but then really wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I was like, this is boring. We're helping other companies. I want to do my own company.
There you go.
And so, at Jive, it was a bootstrap company for 5 years. So we built out a very healthy $12 million profitable business, and then saw a much bigger opportunity on the horizon. And so reinvented the whole business and kind of scrapped the old business and built a new one with some money from Sequoia that took the company from the new business from 0 to 60 million over the next 3 years with a lot of blood, sweat, tears, and more tears and some more tears. And at that point, the board really wanted to take the company public, and I was pretty fried and had little kids. So I was chairman as we geared the company to go public, of which it went public in 2011. And so I ran it as CEO up till 2010. It went public in 2011, and ultimately the company died a slow death on the public markets for a lot of reasons we can get into. I had since moved on and worked in private equity. I worked in venture capital at Andreessen Horowitz for a couple of years. I sat on boards. I incubated companies. I was a coach, and just kind of saw the system from every angle possible, and realized that there are a lot of flaws in the system, that contribute to this only 10% of startups are successful metric. And so initially, I used that as the basis to start acquiring some of those companies. So companies that actually had good bones but had fallen off the venture growth trajectory, and acquiring them and nursing them back to health that was profitable and sustainable. And wanted to share that knowledge, everything I had learned about, how the system works as a bootstrapped entrepreneur, venture-backed entrepreneur, VC, private equity, and to illuminate the systemic challenges that make it hard for people to be in that 10% of successful companies, as well as the internal challenges. What are the insecurities, fears, doubts that we have as founders that get in the way of decision making? And then show my path of how do I get companies unstuck? What does it really look like? So it's a book that was the one I wish I had had as a young entrepreneur, and that I hope a lot of founders can benefit from, is seeing the system for what it is and how our own psyches contribute to that failure rate that we have. But if we do find ourselves stuck in an eddy and not flowing down the river, how do we get unstuck? And what does that really look like?
So without asking you to read the whole book to us, which I encourage all the founders on my podcast to listen to, there's great examples there. But what would you say is the most common scenario that you think you engage with? And I think we're talking mostly B2B tech, but this could probably apply to a much broader audience.
Yeah, so you could bucket the most common problems as the scale prematurely problem.
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
These are founders who equate success with going really fast, and which means that they launch product too fast, they raise money too early, they scale too early, they hire big go-to-market engines too early. So it's a lot of impatience, right? And so the energy that's needed in the early days is more scientific, one of curiosity and learning. And if you can elongate that path, if you can go leaner longer, and as I say, wait for the pull of the market, right? A lot of times what happens is founders just really want to get product out there. That's what they love doing. And they're pushing product onto a market that is not necessarily that receptive to it. Maybe you got lucky, and you kind of crack the code. But normally what I see, because I work with hundreds of companies that have not gotten to that promised land, is that they pushed too early. And so if you can have that spirit of curiosity and learning and use whatever money you have to go leaner, longer with a smaller team and wait for the pull of the market, and the pull of the market is like, when the company can't keep up with demand and there's just too many incoming calls and your customer success people are behind the scenes, just really struggling to keep up with customers. That's the thing you want, right? Where the team is just saying, hey, we need more resources. It's happening so quickly. We really have a tiger by the tail.
Right.
And that's rare because companies do things too quickly, right? And so that's what I would say is the primary problem, and one that I seek to illuminate, and all of the various ways that that manifests.
I could totally second that. And the irony is that doesn't necessarily come from the founders of these companies who I think had that natural curiosity, that more of a technical orientation sometimes, but from the funding side of the market that's saying, hey, you've got to get to 1 million ARR for us to really see you as a real entity and want to invest. So then that then causes the push from the manufacturer or the vendor side or the CEO, hey, we got to get to this, and then that creates the waterfall effect. No,
That's exactly right. You nailed it. It's a tail wagging the dog problem, right? Which
yeah,
is, what do I need in order to raise more money? And anytime I hear founders talk about that, I have to sit them down and talk them through it and say, like,
smack them around.
it's that, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I did come from the East Coast, so there might be a little bit of that. But
yeah,
no, that idea that, like, oh, in 18 months we need to raise again, and we need these metrics in order to raise a Series B. And so they're operating the company as the mechanism to raise more money, as opposed to operating from strategy and true market realities and the ideal trajectory of the business, right? And if you could rethink and reimagine that, what is the ideal trajectory for this business, and do I have deep intuition on what I can achieve out there? And let's finance the business accordingly. And maybe it's 30% growth rate.
no, I
That's
love that
okay. That's
approach.
great.
Yeah, Dave, I love that
Yeah.
approach, but I guess the founder ear in me is saying, well, wait a second, I need to raise money first. So how do I change my story to get the investor side on board with the fact that I'm going to take this more of a scientific or experimental approach before I start to really drive the top line?
Yeah, I mean, there's two things. One is understanding, like, seed capital, the capital that is intended to validate the demand for this and the idea of the company, right, is one. And getting that seed capital from institutions who really understand this process. I
Yeah.
find that, there are really good investors out there who do understand that this takes longer than you expect. And structurally, that may take the form of, a safe note or convertible debt, because that gives you freedom, right? That's not equity that's sitting on your board telling you what to do. That's just equity that may convert at some point, but you still have a lot of ownership and flexibility. So that is a really big part of it. And I think having the relationship with your investors to be able to say definitively, we're going to take the time to do this the right way. I think they want to hear that. Really good investors will want to hear that. I think not so good investors will say, well, we expect you to raise an A round in 18 months, and that's what this is based on, right? That's really short-sighted. And it's such a big institution, the whole idea of, venture capital, right? When I got out of college 30 years ago, there was $8 billion a year invested. Now it's over 300 billion in venture capital, right? So
Yeah.
there's not that much growth that's happened in the meantime, but it means you have a massive system that is telling you, here's what you need to do as a business. And it's very lemming-like in their approach to how companies should be run and when they raise money. And that's where it starts to cause problems.
So, David, educate me then. on the process of igniting a company, in your view, raise the proper seed funding and start a business? You've got product, you've done your research, you're ready to go into the market with the product. What is the pace at which you bring on funding and drive adoption?
This is where I think it's really important for the CEO specifically to rely on their intuition, to know that they probably know more than they think they know, and maybe to have some advisors who can help them connect that intuition, because it's got to be based on a deep sense of the real market demand. It's not just looking at data. And that's a problem they like, because data can be misinterpreted and often is, right? And so I see companies at the other end of this gauntlet where they've gotten stuck. And what happens is that they were misinterpreting the data, or looking at false positives as the basis for wanting to raise capital. They wanted to raise capital so bad they believed a narrative based on a few scant data points that were disconnected as the basis to go raise that capital. And forming a deep intuition along the way of what the market really is one of the most important things, because then you can say, well, maybe let's not raise an A round, let's raise just $2 million, because we can actually get profitable on that, and then we can really own this beachhead market. But then once we own that beachhead market, it's not huge. It's going to take a couple of years to really, develop that market in the right way. But if we do it the right way, then 2 years from now, it's going to open up a lot more opportunities in adjacent markets. And then that's the point where we could raise more capital, because it should really take off, right? And so that intuition around market realities and the ideal trajectory of the business and what good growth should look like, not rapidly expansive, doing too much more than you can handle growth,
Right,
is really important. That intuitive sense for a CEO.
how do you coach for that? How do you help a CEO over index for the intuition side and push away the some of the other traps that they?
Yeah, I think one part of that is intellectual, right? Is to say, that's what the book was about, right? Is saying, look, there's a whole roadside littered with companies that have made these poor decisions in the past, and you can learn from them, and at least you understand the ideas related to this. Another part is emotional, right? Which is saying that you inside, all decisions are emotional at some level, and how do you understand and separate the emotions that are maybe pushing you to go too fast or make the wrong decisions? What are you trying to prove through this business that is causing you to want to go faster than the company really should pursue in terms of growth? So there's a lot that I do in coaching. Coaching is a big word, right? There's thankfully a lot more coaches out there than there used to be.
Right.
But I think availing yourself of resources to help quiet the internal voices that are pushing you to make the poor decisions, get those out of the way so that you can kind of connect with that deeper intuition about what the company really needs. And if you need more advisors and coaches around you to help you connect with that intuition, that's great. That's
Dave,
awesome.
I'm picturing you at the board, on the board meeting, with Sequoia on one side and an Excel or a Kleiner, and you're telling them, hey, slow it down. Why are you guys driving so hard? We got to wait for the market. We got to build these things. We got to study this more. And they're looking at you with fire in their eyes, because they want the revenue, the multiples, and those things to start to go. Now, obviously, it's not quite that way. They want to see and I'm not casting dispersions on my friends in VC, but the reality is there is a push at the board level to hit numbers and achieve those goals. How do you balance this all out?
Yeah, good investors should understand this. And I think if a strong CEO says, here's the operating plan I'm going to, buy into, that I'm going to sign up for, where shorter term, there's less growth, but a lot more learning. And here are the data points behind that learning so we can keep track on what matters most.
Yeah.
But know that my goal is for you to have the big outcome you want. It's just going to take longer than you may think. And let's be in lockstep about that. Good investors should understand that. And if they're not getting,
you're really shining the light on the need to really recruit your investors and be a little bit more maybe process driven or patient or selective even about who you should bring on in your.
Exactly. And when I have this conversation with really good VCs, they totally understand and they believe it, right? There's a lot out there who are not good and, haven't run companies. apply the traditional logic. Like you need to triple, triple, double, 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 and go public. Like that's just awful, right? And it's not helping anybody.
Right.
So I think good investors understand what's really required to build a company, and a strong CEO who says, when they raise the money, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to walk first, and we're going to sprint later, right? And they're going to back that up with an operating plan that is in support of that kind of plan is really important. I think the problem is what happens is VCs treat a lot of founders like they're all sprinters running a 100-meter dash. And the reality, most businesses are like middle distance runners. They're running an 800 or 1500, right? And if they try to sprint out of the gate, they're not even going to finish the race, right? You need to be able to run this race strategically. And that's what these middle distance runners do is they know when to draft, they know when to sprint ahead, they know when to kind of, rely on their teammates. It's not a sprint out of the gate. But if you treat it like that, you're never going to finish.
This metaphor really resonates with me, and I haven't used it before. I don't know why. It is a marathon. I mean, most of the companies that go from seed investment to IPO is a 10-year window, right? And don't VCs sort of, that's their forecast, a 10-year investment.
Right. Yeah, they should be open to a longer time frame. But, again, the infrastructure for investment and these 18-month funding cycles and what I need to do to raise the next round, that starts to become pervasive, and that starts to guide company decision making instead of what's the right thing to do for our customers? What does the market really need? And how do we find the ideal product that has the potential to go big later? And how do we spend time on doing that?
So in a practical matter, Dave, is it okay? I want to ask you how you take a CEO that doesn't get it and fight the inclination to switch horses and find a new CEO, but rather develop that CEO into that understanding that I don't want you to be the sprinter that you think you are, that you think you need to be. I need you to become more of a long distance runner. But we can still leverage a lot of those skills you have. Your sprinter muscles can still be helpful, but you need to be able to develop a longer term approach.
Yeah. Anytime I show the one pager that outlines the book to second time or third time founders, they're like, oh, I wish I had known this. Like I would kill to have had this one pager when I was a first time CEO. So if I'm speaking to somebody who is newer and falling prey to some of those, desires to push too hard too quickly,
right,
I can usually help them understand what the path really looks like by illuminating stories from other founders, by talking to people that have been through it in addition to myself. And if they are willing and open to, different ways of visualizing their company's trajectory, what I'm trying to do is help them be in that lucky 10% of companies that are really successful. But my process for doing so is a little different than the path that they're used to hearing about in the press and with peers, and what we've talked about before with these kind of just traditional funding mechanics. And so if they're willing and open and really believe in themselves, not as an identity for the company, not this company is not them, right? And that their goodness or badness as a human is tied to the connection of the company, but they are a steward for this business. And if they take their role as steward seriously, then that means a long-term perspective and doing the right thing for the company at the right time. And, some may never get there. I think the insecurities run too hot, and they really just want to do what looks good on paper and just, go the traditional way. But if they care deeply about the company, about the idea and bringing it to market, if they care about their people and they're open to ways of kind of putting off short-term happiness and ease with having more money in the bank for the likelihood of long-term success, I can work with that.
Yeah. Dave, I was listening to the press conference yesterday where they announced JJ Redick as the head coach of the Lakers. I don't know if you're fond of that, but I think
but not a lot of experience.
like zero experience as a coach, right? Zero. He did a podcast with LeBron. They talked, and then LeBron talked to the GM and said, "Yeah, hire this guy." But I think, in all honesty, coach, he played in a lot of great places, worked in a lot of great places, and under some great tutelage, was fantastic. But the thing that won me over, because I had an initial feeling like, why would they not hire a guy with 10 years of experience? because he said, it's not about me getting the job, it's about me doing the job. The passion for me is taking AD and LeBron and finding a way to make them more successful, which is quite a, chore given that they're headed to the Hall of Fame, but getting the Lakers back into the finals and maybe fighting for a ring. And he said those kinds of words. I'm like, either somebody wrote him a great script, and in LA, it's not hard to get a great script, I guess, these days. But I felt like that was the answer that won me over. Like he got it. Like he's not stuck. He's going in with a plan and with an open mind and wants to attack. And I think that would probably be a model for coaching new CEOs.
I love that. It's great. In fact, I had a lunch with a CEO friend on Friday, and he talked about how in his first company, he was treating his team like family, right? He had the kind of concept of the company as like family, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's like, that broke down because families break down and there's all kinds of problems and you can't let people go and they're always stuck with it.
Yep.
He's like, this time I'm treating it like a professional sports team. He's right. This is very different. I need the best people in the best positions and I need everybody working well together. It's not a family, but we are a highly tuned sports team, that is equivalent at a professional level. And that was his concept with the startup. And so, first of all, I like the idea of thinking about sports teams in that way. But also, for somebody like JJ to come in who just has the right approach, right? And it's different. And if it works, amazing. Like Phil Jackson did, right? Phil Jackson, very different approach, very Zen approach, right? And he was able to get, a motley group of people who would not have gotten along under somebody else and, have people like Dennis Rodman come in and,
Yeah.
and work with them and, be able to accommodate their differences, but bringing them all together in a powerful way. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I
Well,
like the sports analogy for sure.
I think the counterpoint would be, yeah, but we want to win now, but you got to be patient. And again, if the expectation is that he takes him to the championship, year one, that's unrealistic, and that's the fault of management, not really the CEO or the coach. So you got to debate that. But if you can move to getting everybody in alignment, you're going to be in the best position possible. It feels
Yeah.
like. Again, your book is fantastic. I really enjoy reading it. I recommend it highly for new founders, for old founders, for people who work closely with founders, even. And you bring up the point about coaching too. I think that's really underutilized in this world today, where so many people are starting companies for the first time, and they count on things like podcasts or books to coach them through. But every case is so different, and it's just great to be able to have a resource to check in on and help you through some of the harder times. This is a firewalk. And by doing it by yourself in the backyard, yeah, that's one way, and it's going to get one kind of result. And then there's a way of doing it with the professionals that know how to maneuver that. And
Yeah, I love that. And I'm really glad that coaching is a bigger deal. I actually facilitated a dinner of 25 VCs recently, and it was about the future of the enlightened board member and how do you support CEOs. And I was like, use this to carry the sports analogy further. It's saying you want them in the best athletic fitness for the role. And to do that, now we at least understand that mental health and wellness is a huge part of that. And we have a history of quiet suffering on the part of CEOs, which causes poor decision making and ultimately can kill companies. And so if they are in the best position and the healthiest version of themselves,
yeah,
then the likelihood of success for that company is going to be much higher. And so I have told independent board members and VCs, one of the best things you could do is get trained as a coach. You may not necessarily need to be the coach for that CEO, but those skills that you develop in learning how to be empathetic and curious and kind and understand what's really going on for them is like the WD-40 for a healthy relationship.
did that get a lot of nods? They get a lot of agreement, or did you get some pushback on that?
I think I got mostly head nodding, call it 70%, and then 30% maybe kind of skeptical,
Rhetorical, yeah, sure, Dave. We have time.
Yeah, not everybody's ready for it, but I think there is a massive sea change that's happening where more people are aware of how to, help someone's inner life because it's going to create outer results.
I see indications of that. The hard thing is separating the reality from the action from the words, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, I think that makes sense.
We're in this AI hype cycle with a lot of of reality behind it too in the world today. AI is changing everything. Does that change at all how we look at companies, company building, founder development, and anything like that?
Well, I'm working on my next book. Thanks for the segue.
Hmm.
Which is about unleashing human connection and creativity as your company's superpower. So the idea being that as AI starts to slowly take over the classic knowledge management positions, the means of production jobs where you're moving data around, right, which is what humans have been doing for the last 50 years. We're going to be forced to be better at what humans are really good at. So, areas like empathy and connection and curiosity and imagination, humor and love, quite frankly, which is going to become really important. And it also means that AI is going to make it hard to maintain competitive advantage in the traditional mechanisms, meaning like, where we used to rely on technology IP as the basis for long-term competitive advantage. Once that becomes easier to replicate because the infrastructure is there for rapid development of new technology, it's harder to have long-term competitive advantage in the form of technology IP. And so my premise is that companies that invest deeply into the infrastructure of human growth and connection among their employees as well as their customers can have long-term competitive advantage through those mechanisms. And so the companies of the future are going to be differentiated in different ways. And what I'm trying to do is paint a picture of how you could do that through humans in this era of AI, which is going to be really powerful and important. Going to change, all of business in a lot of ways. And it may take 10 years. We're not quite there yet. And LLMs are
Yeah, I can't
obviously,
even imagine. How do I
not
start
there.
lining up for that quite yet?
Yeah. But I love the idea of it's forcing us to be more human. And how do companies support that ability to be more human and use that as the basis to build the unicorns of the future?
Hot book. What's the date for release, Dave? I don't want you
I
to.
don't know. It's
I'm
like
like your
just
editor
put out a
calling.
book.
When will we have this? We need to buy.
Yeah, I'm trying. But yeah, I just put out, this book, Reignition,
Yeah.
and it's kind of like birthing a kid, right? Where you birth a kid and you're just exhausted from the whole process and the thought of like having another kid, you don't have for a while. And then finally, when you kind of block out how hard it was to do the first kid, you're like, oh, let's have another one. So I have a sample chapter and a proposal written for the next book, but I think getting it all done is going to be a lot of story collection. And so I'm looking for stories right now for companies that are doing really interesting things with connecting humans and how humans tick as the basis for creating successful companies.
I may share some thoughts with you offline, but thanks for pointing that out to us and give us a little window into what's coming down the pike from you, Dave. And I think the Reignition book is on point and very timely still. And thanks for spending some. It's been great. It took a while to wrestle down a time as you're a busy guy, but I appreciate you finding a little spot for us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Keith. Really appreciate it. Yeah, the book Reignition, which sometimes spell check changes to resignation, which I find pretty funny. And all of my stuff is at davehersh.com, HERSH.com.
Yeah,
So really appreciate you taking the time with me today to talk through it.
you bet. Thanks a lot.
All right.